I do kind of feel sorry for Max a bit because both of his, well, like his titles, his first one and his second one, have been tainted by all these other things that the FIA keep messing up
So
on.
I think that's not as bad as I thought, because I thought Aston were out here being like, spend money. We're gonna just yeah. I thought Lawrence Stroll was in in the FIA going, yeah, make it rain for these hoes kind of thing. But that's really, really bad for Alpha. Like I didn't realize Alpha were doing that. I didn't think they were doing that bad.
But it's just there's literally no excuses for like literally endangering the drivers' lives in that way. Especially like you say, when visibility is so low. Pierre was like, I couldn't see the tractor until I was about 2 meters away from it. Hello and welcome back to On the Chicane. You're here with me, Mariam, and my co-host Paris, and we're about to break down everything about the Japanese Grand Prix that happened this weekend. Suzuka, we haven't been there since 2019. Everyone was really excited for this race, just as we were all excited for the Singapore Grand Prix. Um, it's usually a race that delivers. There's usually a lot of action. It's usually a good, thrilling race. And I think we only got a snippet of that because of the bad weather. So Paris and I will kind of go over all the key points and would love to hear what you think after you've listened to our viewpoint. So for you, Paris, how do you think the race was?
I feel like the race was I think it was actually a decent race. There was like really cool parts with Ocon defending against Lewis. You had the kind of battle between Checo and Charles. Like there was interesting points in the race. I do think that the rain really hampered it because you had this massive long wait. So I don't know about you guys, but I woke up at 6 a.m. to watch the race, and kudos to all the American fans who do this on like a weekly basis because I can't do that. I'm so sorry. I was like wrapped up in my blanket. Did not really want to stay up for all of that. And Mariam was working as well, so she was up from even earlier. I just felt like the build up took so long because of the red flag, which happened really early in the race. And on top of that, then you had the rain. But I've been to Japan in September and I know that it is like literally typhoon season. We nearly got stuck in Kyoto because they cancel all of the trains and everything. And you can imagine like how advanced Japan is. So I feel like putting it in that season is just asking for trouble. And they were getting like monsoon level rains where it was just flooding out the track. So I don't know. I feel like it could have just been a so much better race if it was just at a different time in the year.
This is actually something that I was thinking about as well yesterday whilst working. This is my friend for this evening, guys, by the way, because I'm literally so exhausted from being on Japan hours. But anyway, um, I was thinking it makes no sense that we have this every year. Every time we race at Japan, there's always, most of the time, it's really bad weather. You think back to obviously the key race that stands out for me personally in Japan is the 2014 Grand Prix when Bianchi had his horrific accident. And it just makes you think, like, why not move the race to a different time of year where the weather will be better? And I did see one F1 journalist, I can't remember who, someone posting and tweeting about the fact that it's been a conversation that they've been having for a while, but I think it's just the organizers or something who don't want to move it, which makes no sense. But I think April is like the new proposed month for the Japanese Grand Prix, which would make more sense. But I think, yeah, there's the organizers or the FIA or something who don't want to move it. So yeah, it makes no
I think
sense.
they're missing a trick there because I feel like it would just be a really great race if they were actually able to race on normal tires. Yeah, I don't know. The whole weekend was wet. It was wet through qualifying. and the race was just even worse. So I don't think we really got to see everything that Japan had to offer in that sense, in a racing sense. And then generally just across the weekend, there was lots of things that happened on and off track. Like I said, you had the red flag, you had uh driver announcements, there was issues with the FIA penalty system, and um the what happens if you red flag a session. So yeah, I think it was just like it was quite a full weekend, and in an F1 fan or F1 Twitter sense, there was lots to dissect and lots to talk about. But I think racing wise, it just could have been a little bit better, and there was still good racing, but I just think there could have been more. They didn't have any DRS for pretty much the entire race, I think, because of the rain. So it just could have been a little bit better.
Yeah, I do know what you mean. There were just a few poor, bad decisions made, like everyone starting on the full wets when the track was drying up, and just the whole red flag thing. Like, trust me, after having been on Japanese hours for the whole weekend, and then the session's red flag, and you're just kind of waiting around for an hour and a half or however long it was, it's not what you want. And then obviously because of the time limit, they had to start the race, but put a time cap on it. So we weren't racing for laps, we were racing for time. So I think by the time the race started, it was like 8:15 or something here in the UK. So there's 45 minutes left on the clock. So yeah, there wasn't really enough time to do much racing. And then obviously the changing conditions, it did make it tricky. But then that being said, we did get to see some really good racing from specific individuals and then teams as well. There were some teams who did really well as a whole. So yeah, I think if we had more of it, like you said, it would have been a really good race. But for what we got, like just that little preview, I think it was still good. I enjoyed it.
The big thing out of that week, the whole race weekend, is Max Verstappen is now officially the 2022 world champion. Congratulations, Max Verstappen.
Yeah, I mean, he deserves it. He
I
has
was gonna say
been
you
the leader
deserve it.
of.
You have had a he has had a very, very amazing year.
He's
And
been
Red
solid.
Bull provided him with an amazing car this year. I think a lot one of the things that makes me laugh though is everybody's like, oh, they were the underdogs at the beginning of the season. They were never the underdogs. Ferrari just had a slightly faster car. So
Yeah,
that was a bit of a
yeah.
misnomer. And that only lasted like 2 races or 3 races. So no, no. But Red Bull did provide an amazing car that has great straight line speed and handles really well in corners and wet situations and everything. And you can see that in both cars to an extent. Um, so yeah, I think, kudos to him and kudos to them. And it was a deserved win. And I think it was just once again marred by situations off the track, which, as much as I'm not the biggest Max Verstappen fan, as you guys all know, I think that's just a terrible way to win for any driver. I think, if I was Max, I would be pissed off with the FIA because like you've taken like did you see the shot when I think it was Johnny Herbert or someone was telling him you've won, right? You're the champion. And he's like, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Have I?
He
How
was
do I
literally like, well done, what a champion. And Max was like, thanks. It was so bizarre.
awkward, like proper awkward. I just felt like ugh, this what this sport has become.
Yeah.
So
I
I
feel
think
like,
things need to change, definitely.
yeah, I feel like it is. It's it like having several races in one season where at the end of every race you're thinking, okay, who actually is the winner of that race? Who actually is going to be on the podium because there's X incident that happened on track, but the FIA aren't investigating until afterwards. So we don't actually know. Could be this person. Like yesterday, the door was wide open. Like Max wasn't world champion. And then Leclerc got a pretty hefty penalty for something that other drivers have also, had that, like, created that offence before, but haven't been as severely punished. But we all know the FIA is inconsistent when it comes to handing out penalties, so we'll brush that one over, like, under the carpet. But yeah, like, the race is finished, everyone's like, okay, Max, we're going to the next race. Like, you've got, what is it next? It's USA, isn't it? So maybe in Texas, like, you can win this race. And then all of a sudden, while they're doing the interviews, it's announced that Leclerc has a 5-second time penalty. So then they're just like, oh yeah, you're world champion. There's just, I do kind of feel sorry for Max a bit, because both of his, well, like, his titles, his first one and his second one have been tainted by all these other things that the FIA keep messing up on. Not even Max, not even Red Bull, the FIA. So if the governing body of this sport can't get it right, and we're left questioning things after the race for sometimes for days, like, what even is this sport anymore? It's just, it is a
I
bit of a joke.
totally agree. I think, like you said, with the Leclerc issue, like he went off track, he gained an advantage by retaining his position, and that happens all the time. That could have been a like straight away decision. I know it was in the last few laps of the race, but I think it was like the second to last lap, or maybe even the last lap. But it literally happens all the time. You know what the penalty is for that. I think they definitely could have told them before they got to the podium and
There's a
know when
part
they
of
went on
me,
it. Mm-hmm.
sorry, there is a part of me that kind of wants to blame Ferrari a little bit, because they should have been like, hand that back to Checo and then go for him.
They could have, definitely.
So, because we have seen that happen before, where the team
Yeah.
is like, you need to hand that back, but the driver will wait until it's opportune for them,
Mm,
hand that back, and then go in for the overtake. So Charles could have taken advantage of it.
yeah.
Unfortunately, he didn't, and then blah blah blah.
But there's a
But
few minutes before the stewards, like before, so after the drivers finish the race, they park their cars in Park Fermé, they go off and get weighed in the weigh bridge. Like there's time. It's not a very large amount of time, but there is time in between the end of a race and the podium for them to make those decisions. And I think it also comes down to the rules that are quite ambiguous, which were actually brought in after Spa, which dictates the amount of points that are going to be given if a race is cut short. And so that also is kind of playing into the whole issue. During the whole race, I think the commentators were even like unsure of how the point system was going to work, because they thought it was going to be based on the staggered system, which is where if you only do 25%, 50%, or 75% of the race distance, you get a reduced amount of points. But because the race was red flagged and then resumed, not red flagged and then stopped, that meant that actually it still got somehow classed as a full race and you got full points. But then people were arguing, well, hold on a second, what if it was towards the end of the time, and like you said, there was only 45 minutes left on the clock? What if there was only like 15 minutes left on the clock and they only did 11 laps, but you still get full, you still get full points for a minimal amount of laps? So I think the issue is, to me, and I don't know if you guys would agree with me, is that there's just so many scenarios that can come out of any one situation. Like there's so many variables, there's infinity amount. It's like that scene from the scene from Avengers where Doctor Strange is trying to calculate all of the different scenarios that can happen. And I feel like the FIA need to have wording in their contracts for ambiguous situations where they don't quite know what's going to happen. So I don't know how they do that. I'm not a lawyer. I can't write these things legally, but currently what they have is not good enough. And it's like they wrote something that covered very specifically the situation that happened in Spa, but no other situations that might happen similarly but different.
yeah, you're right. It's so confusing for anyone who's a fan, anyone who's working in the sport, even the presenters, the drivers, the teams. No one knows what's going on except from a few people who are sat behind a desk making it up as they go along. So yeah, they're just, I don't know. I don't know how they do it, because like you say, there's too many variables for the FIA to be able to list an outcome for each scenario. but there needs to be like an overall general kind of rule as to how they're going to handle these things, because it's so confusing and no one knows what's going on. Yeah, I don't know how they tackle it, but they need to find a way to tackle it somehow.
Yeah. So the reason for the red flag and all of the chaos that ensued after the red flag was that Carlos Sainz went off and ended up in the barrier. He had quite a nasty little accident as well, actually. Like the way
Yeah.
he aquaplaned and spun, that was pretty disgusting. And he kind of went sideways into the barrier. Some of the signage kind of flew off and nearly hit Hamilton. So also, I think Albon went off at the same time. He had a little accident. So Carlos was out of the race, and he had his car had to be retrieved
Mm-hmm.
by a tractor. Um, I think again we're going back to the FIA, their rules, their systems, how things were in play. And for those of you who don't know, some people watching this might be new to F1. 8 years ago in 2014, Jules Bianchi had a similar accident by which there was a car that had gone off and one of the tractors had come onto the track to retrieve it. He aquaplaned and went off and ended up going into the tractor. There was a massive investigation because after his accident, he sadly passed away. And there was a massive investigation. And one of the recommendations was that you do not have tractors on track when there's low visibility. I don't know if it was ratified into the rules. I couldn't find anything in the rules. I did have a look at the safety car rules, and there was nothing specific about obstructions in there. But I think it's like a general consensus in the community because of what happened specifically to Jules. Like it's just known that you wait until the race has been red flagged, or maybe the safety car takes the drivers through the pits. Like there's so many different ways that you can get the drivers away from the accident area so that you can bring the cranes out to retrieve the car. And they just didn't do it yet in Japan. They didn't do it. So um Pierre Gasly, who also happens to be a close friend of Jules back in the day, he went into the pits and came out of the pits, and he was quite far back from the safety car. And part of the rules is that you have to be within a certain distance of the car in front. I think it's like 10 car lengths. So he has to catch up to the safety car, and he's driving faster, I think, than the safety car speed, but not as fast as the driving speed. So he still was driving like quite slowly. I think they said it was like 200 kilometers per hour he was like driving at. But that speed is too fast for when the race gets red flagged. So they basically penalized him for driving too fast and potentially endangering, I guess, himself whilst the tractor was on track. However, his argument was, and all of the other drivers, like Lando Norris tweeted about it, Stroll, I think, also tweeted about it. Like so many of them all said the same thing, which was, why the hell was that tractor there in the first place at that time?
Yeah. Pierre's interview about that was so like, you could see that he was feeling a lot of emotion because he was just so angry. He was like, how can you do that? You're literally putting my life in danger, my colleague's life in danger, for what? Like, he was like, have we learned nothing from what happened to Jules? Even Jules's dad tweeted about it and was like, this is ridiculous. Like, have you learned nothing from my son's death? Um, and for me as well, personally, like when I first got into F1, Jules was my driver. I was backing him. I was like, yeah, I like this guy. And then obviously everything happened. And like Japan was just, it's always a standout race in my head. That moment of him just going into that tractor is just ridiculous. This was before they had the halo. So the F1 and the FIA introduced the halo to the cars as a result of what happened to Jules. But it's just, there's literally no excuses for like literally endangering the drivers' lives in that way. especially like you say, when visibility is so low. Pierre was like, I couldn't see the tractor until I was about 2 meters away from it, which is ridiculous because if you look at everyone's on board, all you can see in front of you is spray. You can't see anything and just the red flashing lights of the car that's in front of you. I don't know how they drive in these conditions because I would panic and not be able to do anything. But
And they're driving
yeah,
at like 150 miles an hour.
there's the potential for them to aquaplane and to just it's just so dangerous. Like I don't understand whose decision that was and who thought, yeah, we'll get the tractor out there now. Like you say, there's so many different ways in which you can bring the cars back to the pits safely. And even if there's not, nothing can be as dangerous as like unless the accident is like close to track, which Science's accident it wasn't. It was far because it was into the barriers. I'm not saying that that's great, but it's a better scenario than driving past a massive tractor where you could potentially aquaplane into it or drive into it. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know whose decision that was, but it wasn't very smart thinking. And I think pretty much every driver had something to say about it, and all of it was negative. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was just another scenario yesterday where we were just like, what the hell are you doing? Like,
And even like Vettel brought up that it had come up in the pre-race briefing because a similar thing happened on track in Singapore where like marshals and stuff were on track whilst they were driving around. So it wasn't even something that was like, oh yeah, we discussed it years and years and years ago. They literally discussed it this week. So the fact that it still happened and bearing in mind, like some people were like, oh, maybe they're lost in translation, maybe the tractor was sent out. There are like standard rules in Formula One when it comes to marshalling, when it comes to like safety vehicles and recovery and all that kind of stuff. So, and that's like every single track you go to. Yes, they train the stewards in each area and they train the marshals in each area, but even like some marshals travel from track to track. So it's not even like it's just specifically like Japanese marshals that would have been there and maybe they wouldn't have understood. That's not the case. So I think it was just like something where there's a rule that needs to change there. Like, why weren't the teams informed that the tractors was going to be on track and they could tell the drivers? Like, such a simple piece of communication that could have happened, but none of the drivers had a clue.
yeah, I mean, there's no excuses really. It's just poor decisions from the race organizers and whoever was doing all of that, the race directors and whatever. Um, but I guess talking about actual racing, when we did eventually finally get down to racing with 45 minutes left on the clock, yeah, like we said, there were some good battles. There was some good racing. Max was just in a league of his own. He was far ahead. I think Leclerc was on the hunt to try and chase him down, but he wasn't close enough. I don't think at any point really.
He's not been
Um,
close enough any point this year. It's not really been a battle, in my opinion, but yeah.
Fair. But I guess if you looked at the midfield, so many great battles. I think there are a few drivers who stuck out for me as well, who had really good race. Well, I say a few drivers, one driver, which is Lance Stroll. He had such a good race. He didn't score any points, but his driving was so good. He started from the back of the grid. If you see his onboard from the opening lap, he goes straight. He sees a massive gap on the inside, goes for that, overtakes like I think 7 cars, gets up to like P13 from P19. Then there's like a few things going on track, so he manages to just before the red flag, he was up to P11. So and he just kind of kept that going throughout the race, even when we were back to racing after the red flag. He was really, really good at just overtaking and putting his car where it needed to be and not binning it into the wall. And I feel like even Seb in the other Aston, really solid race, really good battling with Alonso at the end. He brought home points. So I think what we've seen so far this season, is that the Aston is actually really, it performs well in the wet. I think wet weather is their friend. I know that for some teams, it like wet weather isn't the best thing, but I feel like Aston always managed to take advantage of the wet. Um, so yeah, I think they had a very good race yesterday. Were there any drivers that stuck out for you? I know we're going to do our winners and losers of the day, but
I
any
mean,
back?
I think just like generally throughout the race, we should comment that they didn't have DRS. So a lot of the kind of overtaking that you see on straights couldn't happen because they didn't have the reduction system deployed because they don't during wet races, I guess because it's dangerous. So they switch it off. And I think that led to some interesting scenarios like Ocon versus Hamilton, where Hamilton was trying to overtake him for pretty much like the entire race and couldn't, just because we all know the Mercedes is not the best car at the moment, especially when it comes to like straight line speed and stuff. So he was trying to be crafty and get around him, and Ocon was just doing his thing. Like he was just defending as best as he could, and yeah, that just didn't happen for Hamilton. So as much as I was obviously very like upset for Hamilton, because I think I would have loved for him to get like fourth or even third, like up onto the podium, but he couldn't, like he just couldn't get past Ocon. So kudos to Ocon because he's like a great driver, as we always say. So yeah.
But yeah, I do think if he had DRS in a few of those situations, he probably would have been able to take him, but he was just not able to. Everywhere he was going, Ocon was just there, just doing what he needed to do. Who else was there? Latifi, for someone who, everyone's kind of given up on, no one really comments on Latifi. He's the butt of everyone's jokes. He
Kept
ended
his
up
nose clean.
actually, yeah, he actually ended up scoring some points yesterday. Were they his first points this
They
season?
were. They were his first points. So
Yeah,
currently like 22 cars I think have raced because why does Nico Hulkenberg have points? Or
because
why is he?
he started. Do you remember Vettel had COVID at the beginning of the
Yes, that was it. I was trying to think like when did he race? And
start?
obviously Nick De Vries raced for Albon when Albon was in um when he was ill, when he was in intensive care with appendicitis. So Nick De Vries got points. Remember, he got 2 points as well. So Latifi was like 22nd in a 20-man championship. And that was wild. That is wild. Like you're on this grid every day, every week, every race. You have not
Yeah,
had time off and you don't have points. But these men who came in one time each have points. So at least he didn't end the year because obviously this is his last year in F1 at the moment, and at least he didn't end the year on nothing.
true. I mean, well done for scoring some points, Latifi. um, yeah, I think who else was there? Alonso and Vettel, like their battling was just great. It was a photo finish between the two of them. Vettel was ahead.
I loved
Like,
it. I loved it. I must admit that
yeah,
was very nice to see.
yeah,
Like the
it was
fact that they
good.
kind of were going down at the exact same time, like a proper drag race. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah, just like another one, which is not a good one, but Bottas and Joe have not scored points for 9 races. Did you know that?
I feel like it's not a fact that I knew off the top of my head, but now that I hear it, like it makes sense.
But that's really, really bad for Alpha. Like I didn't realize Alpha were doing that. I didn't think they were doing that bad. Do you know what I mean? Like they qualify fairly okay. They always get into Q2. Sometimes they get into Q3. I didn't realize that they hadn't scored any points while they were doing all that stuff. I feel like we've been neglecting, like we have not paid any attention
Probably because they don't score points, so we never talk about
to.
them because they're never in the top 10.
But that's
Um,
quite bad. Like, damn, Bottas, man. Come on, you're better than that. You're better than that. Joe, you're better than that too.
I was thinking this yesterday actually, like he's gone from it must be so weird to go from being at the front of the grid in a really good car to now like in a position where you're having to actually fight every race. I don't
I
know.
think they're a good driver pairing though, and I think next year when the cars are all a bit closer to each other, they will do a lot better. I do. I think Alfa Romeo are going to do better next year. Putting money on it from now. Let me know what you think. If you're betting against me or if you're betting with me.
Okay. Well, let's wait and see. I don't know. I need to think about it. We need to have a sit down and think about our predictions for next year. But anyway, just to, I guess, wrap up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's keep it
Just to
short and
wrap
sweet this
up.
weekend. Not as long as the red flag period between
Yeah.
the Japanese
I
Grand
mean,
Prix. So
you'll all be glad for that.
yeah.
Your winners and losers of the weekend of the day, who are they?
I'm gonna give my winner of the day to Max Verstappen for winning a legitimate championship for once. No, I'm joking. No, I'm going to give him the winner of the day for winning the championship. I think, regardless of the issues I may have with him, it's a feat. It's a massive undertaking to actually go out there every week and win and do well. And credit where credit is due. He has done that this year.
Okay. I'm gonna give mine to Seb just because driver of the
Oh.
day. Great weekend for him. It was quite emotional, like that video that Aston Martin posted. It was very much like it was his last race, but
Hmm.
obviously he's still got four more to go. But
I was
everyone
getting
loved,
that vibe
like,
as well.
yeah. Um, Everyone knows that Seb loves Japan, and it's like a really good race for him. So I'm just glad that he had a good race and he managed to get driver of the day. Um, what about your loser?
Loser of the day. Once again, I'm gonna say the FIA and the stewards because, and I feel like this is like the third time I think I've said this year. So take that FIA. Like, no, this is getting ridiculous now. We all just want to enjoy the sport as a sport. Like, you watch a football game, someone scores more than the other team, they've won. Done. Like, there's nothing more to it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just need the sport to go back to the principles before they start keep focusing on the entertainment.
Okay, my loser of the day is gonna go to. I actually don't know. I don't have a loser of the day. I feel like it was just a bit of a. I don't know. I don't have a loser of the day.
So I think the last thing, before we leave you guys for the day, that we want to discuss is the cost cap report. I think it's a bit we kind of discussed it a little bit last week, but last week during the Singapore Grand Prix, we did not have the results of the report. So the FIA have released the results in that they have said who complied with the cost cap and who did not comply with the cost cap. So out of the 10 teams, 8 of the teams complied with the cost cap and 2 teams didn't. And the 2 teams, as rumored, so for once paddock rumors turn out to be correct, was Red Bull and Aston Martin. Aston Martin, it said, had a larger procedural breach
There's no actual like monetary
amount.
breach. Yeah, they
Yeah.
haven't actually. They didn't go over the budget. There was just some person forgot to sign a piece of paper, literally, and now they've got to pay a fine.
So I think that's not as bad as I thought because I thought Aston were out here being like, spend money. We're gonna just yeah. I thought Lawrence Stroll was in in the FIA going, yeah, make it rain for these hoes kind of thing because I I to me I was just like they want to win, right? And to me they would have tried to win by any means necessary, but I'm kind of glad that they didn't in a sense because
Yeah,
that means that the gains that they have been making are genuine and I think it goes to their integrity as a team.
yeah.
Um on the other hand, we have Monsieur Red Bull. We have the Red Bull team. They have also breached it, but they did breach it with a monetary breach, and it was a minority. What's the word? Remember minority breach? Minority. I'm gonna Google this because I can't remember the exact words. They breached it with,
It was like less than 5%, I think.
yeah, a less than 5%. So it was a procedural breach and a minor overspend breach.
Right.
Which means that they breached the cost cap, but it was less than 5% of the amount that they were allowed. So it's less than like $5.7 million or something like that. What the rumors are saying is that they overspent on personnel due to sick leave, and they overspent on catering. However, those two things were not included in the cost cap. And I heard from an auditor that the cost cap is more of a budgetary thing, and it's just an overall amount that teams will budget their 145 million. So it's like, how did they spend this? So I don't think you can really designate the area that you overspent in. You just overspent. You spent more than 1 point
As a whole,
as a
fine.
whole, right?
Yeah.
You've gone over. You've spent 150 instead of 147 or whatever it is, right? So I think trying for if anybody's saying, well, they overspent in this area or they overspent in that area, I don't think anybody can actually say that unless you have literally looked at all of their financials and their budgeting for the last year and a half kind of thing, and you know what they were planning to spend it on in which areas. But in any case, if they're overspending in one area, that means it's probably allowing them to spend more in another area, if that makes any sense. Like, if the budget goes over by 150 million and they've spent it on personnel because they spent it on sick leave, that means that they didn't stick within the 145 for something else.
Yeah, I get
Does
what
that
you're
make
trying to say.
sense?
Yeah, I think so.
So to me, I don't know. I think they need to, if I was the FIA, I would come down hard on Red Bull because it's the first breach, and not because, weirdly, not because they're Red Bull, but because it's the first breach. And if they don't, then other teams are just going to be like, well, they went over the cost cap and they only paid a fine. And if you're a
Yeah.
massive team with tons and tons and tons of money, a fine is not going to do anything for you. You'll just pay that fine every year and be like, well, I don't care. Mariam just flexing how pretty she looks. Just
Yeah. No, I'm just really hot. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think uh, again, I feel like we can't really comment until we get the results of what the actual penalty is going to be. Because, like you say, it's the first instance of this happening. So even then, I don't know if, like, we can have an opinion on what we think the penalty should have been, but because there's nothing to compare it to, it won't really stand. Like, it's just going to be our opinion. So yeah, I guess it's more of a let's wait and see what they say kind of thing.
but
But
do
they
you
are
think
taking
they
their
should be?
sweet time.
They are taking their sweet time, and when they do come out with the penalty, do you think it should be, so the things that they've listed is that it could be a fine, it could be world championship points docked, it could be a reduction on it could be world drivers championship points as well as constructorship points docked from that season that they breached the cost cap in. It could be less time in CFD, which is like the wind tunnels and things like that. So what do you think should be an appropriate response to this?
That's a tough question. Um, I don't know. I don't know if I'm qualified to say what I think it should be. Um, honestly, I don't know. Again, I feel like I can't have an opinion. I can't say what I think is right and wrong because there's nothing to compare it to. So I think we just have to wait and see what what the FIA kind of deem as appropriate and kind of just go with that and use that as an example for the next time it happens. Um,
Take his points away. No, I'm joking. I don't know. I do think it should be something that fits the crime. They've overspent, which means that they've probably had more development. It's hard to pin down exactly where that development would be, so reduce their time in the CFD next year. I think it has to be something that is going to impact their development, in my
yeah.
opinion.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's wait and see what they say.
But yeah,
Um,
so that is everything that we want to talk to
yeah,
you guys about today. But let us know your thoughts on cost caps and FIA procedures and racing in Suzuka during typhoon season, like mad people, tractors on track. Anything that happened off the track that we didn't get a chance to talk about this week, like Gasly moving to Alpine and Nick DeVries moving to AlphaTauri and all the rest of it. Let
yeah.
us know your thoughts and let us know uh, what else you'd like us to cover when it comes to Suzuka. And we'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.